All right, let's just jump right in. Today, we are unpacking Mika Waltari's absolute masterpiece, The Egyptian. What we're doing here is creating a completely covered summary of this massive, sprawling epic. We're going to distill this enormous story down to its core, sweeping across the ancient world through the eyes of a single physician, exploring empires, revolutions, and the real depths of the human soul.
This story is, quite frankly, huge. It plays out on just a tremendous canvas. We're talking over 1,000 years before Christ, sweeping across multiple ancient empires. You've got massive political revolutions, you've got crushing personal tragedies, and the really brilliant part? The whole shebang is told from the perspective of just one guy, Sinuhe, a physician who somehow ends up rubbing shoulders with pharaohs and kings.
Now, interestingly enough, the narrative actually kicks off at the very end of his life. We find Sinuhe, he's older, he's incredibly bitter, and he's writing out his life story. And he makes it crystal clear. He is not writing this to please any gods, and he definitely isn't writing to flatter some king. He's doing it for himself, just trying to process the absolute whirlwind of a life he's lived, especially now that he's been exiled and stripped of all his wealth and power.
So, to understand how he got to that point, here is our roadmap for today's explainer. 1. The physician's exile. 2. A youth in Thebes. 3. Travels in the ancient world. 4. The religious revolution. 5. War and betrayal. And finally 6. The eternal cycle.
All right, Section 1. The physician's exile. The bitter end of a brilliant life. Let's see exactly where Sinuhe is when he puts pen to paper.
We find our narrator banished to the desolate shores of the Eastern Sea. And the stakes here, they are absolute. He is strictly forbidden from ever stepping foot in Thebes again. In fact, the royal decree states that if he leaves his little prescribed area, he'll be, and this is a direct quote, crushed like a frog between stones. But you know what the deepest tragedy is here? This brutal order came directly from the pharaoh, a man who actually used to be Sinuhe's closest friend. So now he's lost the Nile he loves, and he's left with absolutely nothing but his memories.
Which brings us to Section 2. A youth in Thebes. The reed boat and the false love. So, how does a man end up with such a tragic fate? Well, we have to look at his beginnings, which are a total mystery. As an infant, he's literally found adrift in a pitch-daubed reed boat by a poor physician and his wife. Fast forward to age 7, he thinks he wants to be a soldier, but his dad shows him this mutilated, totally forgotten war hero. And yeah, that firmly pushes young Sinuhe into medicine instead. As he grows up, he trains in the House of Life, strikes up a friendship with this wildly ambitious kid named Horemheb, but then, disaster. He falls head over heels for a highly manipulative courtesan named Nefer.
And, he falls hard. In his blind obsession with this woman, Sinuhe makes a completely disastrous mistake. He literally signs away everything he owns to her. And when I say everything, I mean his aging parents' home and even their tomb. It's a betrayal so deep it actually drives his parents to suicide. The crushing, unbearable guilt of this is what ultimately forces Sinuhe to just pack up and flee Egypt entirely, taking only his one-eyed servant Kapta along for the ride.
Moving on to Section 3. Travels in the ancient world, discovering empires and lost loves.
What starts out as him just running away quickly turns into this massive, sweeping tour of foreign empires. And what's really fascinating is how his medical skills basically become his ultimate passport. Being an Egyptian physician gives him unbelievable access. He treats patients over in Syria, he sees the brutal reality of timber slave labor in foreign forests, and he even travels to Babylon where he actually treats the boy king. While he's there, he rescues this beautiful captive dancer named Minafeo. Together, they head off to Crete, which is this vibrant, incredibly luxurious island civilization that pretty much throws out all the social rules Sinuhe grew up with.
But as you might guess, underneath all that Cretan beauty is a really dark secret. Sinuhe falls deeply, deeply in love with Manea, but she is completely bound by her faith to the Minotaur cult. Now, this is a secretive, brutal religion where young people literally leap over wild, charging bulls for sport before ultimately being sacrificed to a monstrous sea god in a dark cavern. And Manea? She fully believes she's destined to enter that god's dark house.
Despite Sinuhe begging her not to, Manea dances before those bulls and walks willingly right into the cavern. Later on, a desperate Sinuhe sneaks into the cave to find her, and what he discovers is just horrific. The so-called god they worship, it's really just the rotting, bloated corpse of a sea monster,
and Manea has been murdered by the high priest to keep the cult's little secrets safe. Sinuhe's heart is just completely shattered by this. Broken and forever changed, he returns home in Section 4, The Religious Revolution, the Madness of Pharaoh Akhenaten. Sinuhe steps right off the boat into a country tearing itself apart. He is caught dead center between two massive opposing ideological forces. On one side, you have the new pharaoh, Akhenaten. He envisions this beautiful utopian world, universal peace, pacifism, and the worship of a single god of light, Aten. Then, on the other side, you've got Sinuhe's old childhood buddy, Horemheb. Horemheb is now a military commander, and he is all about pure pragmatism, traditional order, and absolute military dominance.
Now, Akhenon's dream of universal peace and equality, it sounds amazing in theory, but in practice, it is an absolute disaster. His strict refusal to ever shed blood basically gives foreign enemies a free pass to slaughter Egyptians abroad. Back home, it leads to starvation, the rapid loss of the empire, and just massive, violent riots right in the streets of Thebes. Meanwhile, you have the old order of Ammon, backed by the military, promising to restore Egypt's former glory. But their method? Bloody, ruthless suppression.
This total civil collapse brings us to Section 5, War and Betrayal, Forging an Empire in Blood.
To save Egypt from completely falling apart, Sinuhe is pushed into doing the unthinkable. The political elite convince him to poison the failing pharaoh Akhenaten, which flings the door wide open for Horemheb to seize power. And man, Horemheb wastes zero time restoring order through some brutal military genius. To take down the powerful Hittite army, he executes this absolute tactical masterpiece. Step 1, he digs a massive valley-wide trench in the desert. 2, he perfectly camouflages the whole pit with brush and sand. 3, he baits the heavy Hittite chariots into a full-speed charge. And 4, he just watches as the entire enemy front line plunges straight into the earth. It is devastatingly effective. Horemheb shows us that he will prioritize national survival over human morality every single time.
But that pragmatism puts Sinuhe in yet another agonizing, impossible position. The Egyptian royal family tries to marry a princess off to a Hittite prince, which would essentially hand the empire right over to the enemy. So Horemheb orders Sinuhe to head out into the desert and secretly assassinate the prince on his way to Egypt. Think about that for a second. Can a physician, a guy who took an oath to heal, suddenly become an assassin for the state? It's a dilemma that completely tears Sinuhe apart inside.
And finally, we arrive at Section 6, the eternal cycle, the truth that exiles.
Just take a step back and think about the sheer scale of the world Sinuhe has traversed in his life. He has walked through the staggering opulence of Babylon. He uncovered the darkest, bloodiest secrets of Crete. He survived the horrors of war in Syria, and he navigated the riot-torn streets of Thebes. He has quite literally seen the absolute best and the absolute worst of humanity across multiple continents and cultures.
So after all of that, what is his ultimate takeaway? Well, he starts preaching equality among all men. He openly condemns the entire institution of slavery. He completely rejects the idea that endless war is somehow necessary. But his biggest mistake? He is a living, breathing reminder to Pharaoh Horemheb of the incredibly bloody and illegitimate path he took to get the throne. Horemheb looks at Sinuhe and realizes his old friend's newfound beliefs in peace and equality are basically like throwing sparks into dry reeds. So to protect his crown, the pharaoh banishes his oldest friend to the shores of the sea to die alone.
Stripped of his wealth, his home, his friends, everything, Sinuhe just sits by the sea and writes, and he comes to this incredibly profound realization. He doesn't need a fancy tomb or his name carved into some giant stone monument. His immortality? It just lies in the shared, eternal experience of simply being human. As he says, he has lived in everyone who existed before him, and he's going to live on in all who come after him. He's experienced the tears, the laughter, the incredible goodness, and the deeply rooted wickedness of mankind.
And that leaves us with a final, pretty provocative thought. When Sinuhe looks back across thousands of years, across the rise and fall of these massive empires, the wild religious fanaticism, the seemingly endless wars, you have to ask, does human nature ever really change? I mean, are we today still fighting the exact same battles, falling into the exact same traps, and repeating the exact same cycles that Sinuhe did all those millennia ago? It's definitely something to chew on. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning the world around you.